making it means $1 above zero.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from a very practical standpoint, if I am covering all my bases through the work on music that I do, then I consider that to be a success.
Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
Welcome to Making It with me, your host, Terry Woolman. I really appreciate you joining us every week, and I want to make sure that you know that you can find all of our episodes on entertalkmedia.com, on Spotify, or on iTunes as a podcast at Making It with Terry Woolman. I created this show to focus on what it takes to have a lasting career in the ever-changing landscape of the music business. And I met my guest today a few years back when we were both performing on a play called When You're in Love, the Whole World is Jewish. And TJ Troy, my guest, was the drummer / percussionist. I was playing guitar, mandolin, and the associate conductor. And as it happens many times when you are randomly thrown into an experience with new people, some of you become lifelong friends. And this was one of those examples of that. So let me tell you about my guest. Grammy Award-winning artist TJ Troy combines an eclectic knowledge of percussion from around the world with his innate musicality to create a powerful voice in the world of contemporary percussion. He has performed at some of the most prestigious music festivals worldwide, including South by Southwest, National Folk Festival, and the Arab Music Conference in Egypt. He has appeared with such artists as Pete Townsend, Billy Idol, Ustad Ashish Khan, Momar Khadem, Omar Farouk, Saba Motalebe, Emil Richards, and Cirque du Soleil. By the way, that was a mouthful. As composer and producer, TJ's ensemble Run Downhill combines worlds of music, graphic novels, and live performance, releasing 5 albums of music, 4 comic books, and hours of multimedia video. His revolutionary multimedia album comic book, Spurs No. 1, was selected for competition at the 2015 Seattle Transmedia and Independent Film Festival. His voice and bass marimba performance on Parch Ensemble's Plectra and Percussion Dances contributed to the group's 2014 Grammy for Best Classical Compendium, and in 2018, TJ became the group's president. TJ Troy, welcome to Making It.
Terry, thanks for having me, man.
You're welcome.
Great to see you down here.
Likewise, and for our listeners, we are in the studio together. It seems to be a new trend, but a few of my artists have been coming to my studio, so we can literally sit knee to knee, no joke, and have a conversation, which is a lot more fun for me.
It's a lot more fun for me too. You know, it's one, I get to see one of my good friends who, how often do we get to see one another? Maybe once a year,
right,
if our schedules will permit that.
That's right.
You know, but simultaneously what we're talking about in terms of making it in the music industry, this is best served as a one-on-one conversation.
I agree.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Well, we opened today's show with a very eclectic piece of music, and it's titled Allegro Paranoia from your soon-to-be-released next album.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, this is going to be Parch Ensemble's Volume 3. This is our third album that we're going to be releasing on Bridge Records out of New York.
And this is the group that you were Grammy nominated and won a Grammy for as well.
Correct. So the band so far has 3 nominations, 1 from our first record, 2 for the second record, and the second record was the album that brought the Best Classical Compendium Award home.
And what does compendium mean? I looked it up. But...
It's kind of the classical music album of the year, you know.
Okay.
And there's a broad set of criteria that the committees use to define whether or not a record can be considered a compendium or not. And the way that we sort of contextualize it is that this album is only the music of one composer. So our ensemble, Parch, the music is written by a singular composer. His name was Harry Parch.
Right.
And he was an American composer, born in the early part of the 20th century, died in 1974, and grew up principally around the Southwest, beginning in Arizona and then points around California and the rest of the Southwest. And he is just a dynamic example of the American avant-garde, and even took it to a further extreme. So most of us, when we think of American classical music of the 20th century, we think of figures like John Cage.
Right, that's who comes to mind for me.
Morton Feldman. We think about people like Arnold Schoenberg, who taught out of UCLA and sort of developed this...
Americana.
Right. And, well, I mean, Americana, there's a mix of definitions around that word, and we have to be careful because most of the time...
Well, I have to be careful because I'm actually sitting across from somebody with a master's degree.
There you go. And I'm going to hold you to it, Jerry.
I know. You're going to keep me honest. And I'm highly educated, but I'm sitting across from a scholar and friend. So
well,
go ahead.
Thank you.
Teach.
So Americana, when I hear that term, I generally am thinking, American folk music, music that we generally associate with rural areas of the country and more, mountain landscapes, et cetera, et cetera. So we're thinking of stringed instruments and plucked instruments and strums and things like that. And we're also thinking about a basic form of songwriting. It's a basic harmonic vocabulary in comparison to something like jazz, which has a very rich and in-depth harmonic vocabulary that comes along with it. So when I hear Americana, I'm generally thinking of folk music or country music or something similar like that. Now, to me, to my ear, a lot of Harry Parch's compositions I can only describe as being American. Okay. And the reason that I draw that conclusion is not only the musical textures that he creates with his very unique instrumentation, which we'll get to in a second,
right?
But the fact that for a large part of his life, Harry was literally a hobo, literally riding the rails.
Right. When you say hobo, he was riding the rails, riding trains in Woody Guthrie style.
Yeah. And this was a large part of his life. And in fact, there were several points in his life where he'd be living in an area and suddenly become so restless he would have to basically ditch everything and go out on the rails again for often months or years at a time. I'm not sure if it ever got to years, but certainly months at a time he'd be out on these journeys. And he was also someone, he would get picked up by the, in the post-Great Depression era of the United States, there was the work initiatives where everybody needed to work and have a job. And so they would round people up sometimes and put them on a bus and send them north to Washington State to pick strawberries or cherries for the season. And when the work was done, they would pay them. And then they'd say, okay, you guys are off on your own again. And so they would just pick people up for this random farm labor, random manual labor, and Parch would get, picked up in those types of situations from time to time.
It's interesting because John Cage also, in addition to being an educator like Harry Parch was, he was also picked up odd jobs. At one point, John Cage was painting or cleaning walls to make a living.
Yep. Yeah.
Which is, one of the things that I want to talk to you about. I want to talk about Parch because you've got this new record coming out. But, it's so fascinating to me that these renowned American composers couldn't always make a living as a musician, as a composer, as a player. As we still have those challenges today in our lives, and you and I not excluded.
Sure.
And I just find it really fascinating. I do want to steer the conversation today towards the comparisons between brilliant composers like that, amazing musicians and artists like yourself and the rest of the Parch Band that still have to figure out how to, pay rent or mortgage every month.
Sure. I think it's a thing that people forget about, is that in any historical context that you look at, if you look as far back as Beethoven, or even earlier, the arts have relied on private patronage.
Right, donors.
Yeah. And in Beethoven's case, he lived with a benefactor and, was given rooms and quarters and instruments and space with which to do his work. The curious thing about Beethoven, however, is before him, the musicians were looked at as part of the servants within the aristocracy. So living at the castle with your benefactor, you didn't sit at the head table with everybody. You sat at the servants' table, which is in the kitchen, And so when it was time, they needed entertainment, they needed music, bring the composer, bring my pianist into the room, and let's hear, and maybe this was even, too early for that, bring in the harpsichordist, or bring in my string quartet and let's hear some music now. Whereas Beethoven absolutely demanded. He said, I am no different from anybody else. I will sit at the head table and you'll offer me that respect, or hell with you and your money. And they listened to him because he was that type of dominant personality. He was just that kind of guy. And good thing that they did. He's, regarded as one of the greatest improvisers that ever lived. So far off of the end of the genius spectrum for what he could do as a composer. But it's a reminder that you're that brilliant, but your life still has these challenges as you're trying to navigate a career through music. It doesn't matter what era you're from, you're always going to encounter these challenges. And Harry Parch, was no different from that. He received a Guggenheim fellowship and went to Europe and had enough money to start building his instrument. So let me just give you a little bit of a preface. Harry began as a piano player and was quite good and was making pretty good scratch playing for silent movie theaters.
Right. He started around when he was 15, I believe, doing that.
Very young guy. And just had, a job at the local movie house and would just play those scores on piano. And so he was a proficient player, a good sight reader, and obviously very intelligent. In his home, his family, his father was a Chinese ambassador. So the family in his early years spent a lot of time in China.
Which is why his mom sang to him in Chinese?
Correct.
In Mandarin. Interesting.
And so that world of music is in his ears. Right. And then he comes back to the Southwest and he's, not only looking at, scores from classical composers and contemporary composers of his time, but then he's also hearing, music from Native American communities in and around the Southwest where he's growing up. And he's picking up and assimilating all these different things. But what really got Harry, he came to California. He was enrolled at USC. I don't even think he lasted a semester before he dropped out. And he realized this is not for me, because this is this absolute, very rigid classical structure, which he had already begun to divorce himself from and was quite vocal.
Which is very similar to John Cage, who also dropped out of college, in less than 2 years.
Yeah,
because it wasn't for him.
Schoenberg told him he couldn't write counterpoint. He said, you can never be a composer if you can't figure out how to write counterpoint. And Cage was like, well, hell with you. I'll go do this other thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting that we're bringing these parallels up between Parch and Cage, where Parch was not very flattering of Cage in his work. He kind of felt that he was a little bit of... he played the game and played it too well, which is a little bit of ass kissing combined with a little bit of sort of academic loftiness. Like, I'm too smart and if you don't know, I'm not even going to tell you. Right. That sort of attitude. That's kind of how Harry read.
Well, and Parch seemed more to me in doing research on this was more of a renegade. As a matter of fact, in 1953, he founded the Studio Gate 5. Yeah, he built a studio in an abandoned shipyard in Sausalito, where he was building instruments. I'm talking to you. You know all of this, but I was doing some catch up. But in 1962, he built another studio in Petaluma that was a former chick hatchery.
Yeah.
And I thought, this guy's really forward thinking.
Yes, he is. Yeah. So Harry, his musical voice began to emerge with his concepts of intonation. And he did not hear 12-tone equal temperament as being the absolute law of intonation. And he didn't accept it as such because his background, his ear, he had a tremendous ear, was giving him all sorts of information that didn't fit within the context of a 12-tone octave. So how do you contextualize that information? How do you contextualize music from other cultures and put it into a 12-tone octave? Well, you're bending the truth then. And he said, I really don't want to do that.
Bending the truth.
Right.
Well put.
The other thing that he really was against was the treatment of the human voice in Western classical traditions, especially opera. He did not care for this. He thought it was a bastardization of the human voice. He didn't want it. He thought that there was much more interesting musical information in the spoken intonations of the human voice. Because as you and I are talking right now, you hear this contour of our own voice. You know, we raise our voice to put certain emphasis, or we lower the voice to place other emphasis, right? And so there's intonation built within this. You can't map this out on 12 tones. And so he began to investigate what we call just intonation. All right, just intonation is tones that are based off of the harmonic series. So any note anywhere in nature, okay, you take a vibrating object and you pluck that, or you somehow make it vibrate to produce a tone. Inside that tone is embedded the overtone series, okay? You know what this is about, but to describe this to your listeners a little bit, you have a fundamental pitch, but then you have this series of other pitches that exist up above that and embedded within the oscillation of the sound wave itself. So the first partial that you encounter is the octave above that fundamental pitch, and then you'll encounter the fifth, and then you'll encounter a fourth, and pretty soon you start hearing overtones that we would describe as major and minor thirds, except they're not equal tempered major and minor thirds, right? They are just tuned major and minor thirds. And this has to do with the relationship of the overtone to the fundamental pitch. Equal temperament is exactly what it sounds like. The space between each half step on the piano is equal. All right. And this was done, it was done deliberately to equal temper everything, which is to make it so that classical music that was being written in Austria could therefore be played in France and be played consistently according to the composer's vision, right? Well, good. I'm glad that we defined that. So now that there is, you know, some sort of egalitarian treatment of intonation across Europe, and that, of course, is going to inform the Western classical tradition. But it doesn't inform all musical tradition because many musics around the world don't treat intonation like this. And so Harry began to investigate that, and the further down that rabbit hole he went,
it is a rabbit hole,
and
for
it's
sure.
a deep hole, okay? And you could spend your whole life trapped in there. Well, he finally reached a conclusion that he arrived at 43 tones per octave, just to kind of make the story shorter a little bit here. He arrived at 43 tones. And
by the way, I am fascinated, but making it shorter is better, probably, so that we can focus on
exactly
on the new album,
right,
and also on you, and also what this has to do with making it, which it has a lot to do with making it.
It does. So he arrives at this 43 tones per octave, but he doesn't have any instruments to play these tones.
How many microtones are there, or quarter tones, in Indian music?
Oh, I couldn't even begin to start with that. Indian music is diatonic in its nature.
Right.
Okay. And it uses the same 12 tones as Western tempered music, but the slides, the meent, okay, the motion between notes, that is all microtonal. And so when you hear a bend from a sitar or something like that, or a bend in a gamic in a singer's voice, right? The gamic is the undulation, right? Those will be all microtonal, and they are very specifically prescribed.
Great, thanks. So that's a whole another lesson.
Absolutely. And so Harry, with his 43 tones, realized, I can't play these on Western instruments. I have to invent instruments to start playing them. And here was his second rabbit hole. The first one was intonation. The second one, his famous quote was, I'm a music man, philosophical music man seduced into carpentry. Because he needed to build all of this stuff. And he started out with an instrument called the adapted viola, which was a viola body with a cello neck that he mounted onto it. So it's a longer fretboard. And he started composing tunes with the adapted viola and the human voice. And that began this incredible body of work spanning 5 decades, and included 27 instruments of his own design and invention. And I don't know the exact number of compositions because there's some discussion about whether we count one composition twice.
Right.
Certain compositions had different titles because he would do different editions of the piece. And so we started with Parch almost in our ensemble. Okay. We started in almost the exact same position. Our music director and the founder of the group, John Schneider, he just was enamored with this music. And the first instrument he built was the adapted guitar, which is a guitar that has been refretted and has different string courses. It's 3 pairs of 2 strings. Okay, so 6 strings, yeah, but they're like courses of 2. And the entire fretboard has been reset to be able to perform these certain compositions. And so John, like so many musicians, we encounter a type of music or a composer or an aesthetic, and we're artists, and we say, I have to own that I have to be able to play this music. I need to bring it closer to me, and it becomes an obsession. And that's truly what happened in John's case. He just became so enamored with this, he had to continue. So he built one instrument and then wasn't satisfied. So he built a second and then a third, and then he recruited other members to come along with him. So I joined the group in 2004. John's experiments began about 98, 99, somewhere in there. And he built a few instruments in the early 2000s. In 2004, there were now 5 of us in the group: John Schneider, David Johnson, Aaron Barnes, Nick Terry, and myself. We were the 5 first members of the group. And then since then, we have put on a concert at least every summer, and most of the time our concert season is a little bit broader, down at the Red Cat Theater, which is downtown Los Angeles. We've now are about to release our 3rd record, so we've kind of started from this very small, humble beginnings.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
By the way, shameless plug, what's the name of the record? When is it coming out? Where can people find it? So
the record is Volume 3, Sonata Dementia. It's available on Bridge Records. The official release date for the record is going to be the 1st of June. Our album release event that we'll do is a 2-night event, Friday and Saturday, June 28th and 29th, and that'll be at the Moore York Gallery in Highland Park in Los Angeles. And what's a good website for people to find that information if they want to go see you and hear you? You can go directly to parch.la. That's PARTCH.LA. And that's the official website for the band. We're very excited with this record. It's a collection of pieces that some of these are the inaugural recordings of some of these pieces. We've kind of gone back into Harry's archive, and we found these little rare gems that haven't been released in a recorded version ever before, including a version of Harry Parch performing one of his own compositions on his own. A recording of his. And so it's going to be part of our collection for Volume 3. Fantastic. So, yeah. So it's neat because it's a big showcase of our work as musicians and as a group that's been together now for, this is our 16th season now. Or, that's pretty remarkable. I mean, it's hard enough to keep a band together. Yeah. In any style of music, pop, R&B, hip hop, whatever, but an eclectic, classical ensemble. Yeah. Kudos to all of you. Yeah. For doing this. You. And also, I mean, clearly you were doing something collectively, of interest because otherwise you wouldn't have gotten the attention of the Grammys and actually won a Grammy. And as you said, 3 nominations, 1 win. Yeah. That's pretty fantastic because there's a lot of wonderful music that gets recorded that doesn't get the attention that your group has. Before we move to talking about you for the second half of our conversation, you bet. Why do you think people are drawn towards the music of Harry Parch and your collective performance of his music? I think there's a variety of reasons. The first thing that jumps out to mind is is the thumbing of the nose in the establishment. Okay.
Yeah.
Is really at the core of what I just described nowadays as the punk rock ethos. And I think that's the right term to put on this, even though so much of Parch's sensibility was developed before we could even call music punk rock music, right? Because that was something born in the 1970s, and Parch's, most of his work was before any of those bands even launched. But there's an aesthetic, there is a set of beliefs inside and embedded within that I think is much more universal.
Right.
The DIY aesthetic really factors in very healthily into this, which is I have a vision, I know it can be done, and I'm not going to wait for someone to either give me the permission or show me how to do it. Instead, I'm just going to go do it, and I'll take the slings and arrows and the kicks and the bruises that come along with that, because believe me, you're not going to do that without suffering some setbacks and some hardship through it. It's a hard road to hoe when you say, I'm going to do this on my own, right? And that's really embedded within the spirit of Harry Parch. This is somebody who was so anti-establishment, he was literally homeless.
But it's also embedded in the spirit of each of you that are in the ensemble, and embedded in me as an artist. And as fascinating as all of the theoretical and historical aspects of everything that you've been sharing with us are to me, and hopefully to our listeners, this just got really interesting to me, because now you're talking my language.
Yeah.
Being willing to take the slings and arrows and doing something because it's important to do.
To you. Yeah.
To you.
Exactly right. And therefore it has a lot of meaning. And so when you find yourself at that point in your life where the activities you're engaged in are giving you that level of meaning to where it transcends the rest of the world, that I don't need television anymore, I don't need the internet right now, I'm just going to be building this instrument, or I'm going to be writing this music, or I'm focused on making this aspect of my artistic practices as perfect as I know how to make them. The rest of the world tends to fade into the background a little bit. And that, I think, is the element of Parch's work that speaks so universally. I mean, that is a universal concept that every artist encounters. The other part of it that I think is so engaging is the physical aspect of Parch's work. And so here we are, we're talking about a new album getting released.
Right.
But the beauty of Parch's music is the live performance. It's the live performance, and it's not even a video recording of a live performance. I'm talking about being in the room and being next to those instruments, and you feel the push of sound waves against your face.
Right.
This is I describe it as a player's music. That's what has brought the musicians in our ensemble together, and it's kept us in an ensemble for 16 years with very little turnover. Right. That's what's kept us together, is the juice that we get when we play the instrument, and we play it at a high level, right? Where we're really talking about delicate nuance. The material is there. We play things with a high degree of accuracy. It's not like we're missing notes or dropping beats or stuff like this. I mean, we're playing and we're solid interpreters of the work, but it gets to that point where we can have discussions such as, can you make that one phrase just that much louder or that much softer? Or as a percussionist, switch to a softer mallet or switch to a harder mallet on your instrument to get a different timbral response, and making those adjustments because one venue, one hall reads differently from another hall. So to get to those points when we're getting to that level of detail, well, now audience, come get close to us, and now you feel and see that detail. And that's when real transcendence can actually occur. And this is what's missing, in my humble opinion, what's missing so much in modern day musical discussion, our modern day parlance of music. Whether you're a professional player, you're an amateur player, or you're just an aficionado or a listener, right? This is the part that is being lost within all of this, is we're so entitled to this instant gratification that we can pick up a device and we can instantly know, right? Well, you know all about Harry Parch. You just looked him up on the internet, and so you've learned about it, right? Well, but there's a part of that that's been lost, right? The more that we tell the story, the more the story gets diluted. You have to come back to the source. And in this case, the source is the music that the man wrote on the instruments he intended them to be played on. And that's where we come in, is we're warriors in that sense. We're so dedicated to playing these notes.
Right.
Right. And we're not going to let anything conflict with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the spirit that the audience picks up on when they come to see us play, is not only have we taken the initiative to build our own set of parts instruments, ours are replicas of the original instruments. We've been rebuilding them on our own.
Right.
Right. And we assembled the group on our own, and we book our own concerts. You know, like how often do you hear independently run ensembles who are not only getting Grammy nominations, but Grammy wins?
Right.
Right. That's a pretty rare thing.
That are doing it guerrilla style.
Exactly.
Like any other independent artist.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Let's switch. We're about a half hour into our conversation, so I want to take the second half and focus on you, which is still connected to Parch and all of the other wonderful projects that you do. But I want to talk about your philosophy and your approach and a little bit about your personal background.
You bet.
I just want to start, since this is radio.
Yeah.
People don't know, but you are 6'5". You're a tall guy.
I am.
And I'm just curious, has height influenced or added to your career in any profound or surprising way?
Yes.
I always thought so.
Yeah. That starts to venture into really personal territory.
Okay.
And we'll touch on some of those things, and I'm happy to share some of them, but it's not always been pretty and happy.
Okay.
Okay. And, some of it, yes, I'm a big man. Okay. The world doesn't feel that way to me. Okay. I don't experience myself as being large, but I do experience oftentimes people experiencing me as being large. And then there's other things that come along with that: imposing, intimidating, right? There's a number of other adjectives that come along as a descriptor of me.
One descriptor that I attach to it is confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have other friends who are tall.
Yeah.
And they seem to walk through the world with a sense of confidence. Perhaps the air's cleaner up there. The view is a little bit broader.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it was just something I was curious about. And we can talk about it if it makes sense in the rest of the conversation. You describe yourself as a holistic artist. And I love that word. What does the term holistic artist mean to you?
So just starting with the word holistic, what is that? That means characterized by all the different components of a singular body, of a singular system, right? So we talk about holistic medicine. I think that's where we hear that term come up quite a bit. And holistic treatments of a physical ailment, that's going to mean, let's look at diet, let's look at your activity level, let's look at your sleep level, in addition to looking at the physical symptoms that you're in to see the doctor for in the first place. Hey, I got a sore back. Okay, good. Let's talk about your back, but let's talk about all the other underlying components that feed into the fact that it's your back that is hurting, not the back, your back. And I think that's a really important thing to start thinking about. When we're talking about an artist, okay, we're talking about you as the artist, not artists in general. Now, we make stereotypes and we make generalizations, and often they're very effective to help a conversation or a discussion move in a certain direction, because we're always seeking deeper understanding. But at a certain point, we have to revert back to the level of the individual. We have to take it in a case-by-case scenario. So what does being a holistic artist mean to me? So my day starts out, I wake up in the morning.
What time?
It's anywhere between 7 and 8. Okay.
Likewise.
Yeah. And the first thing I do is make a cup of coffee, and then I'm sitting down behind the tabla. So I play the North Indian tabla. I've done so for about 20 years.
You have not only played, but you have been studying the tabla for over 20 years.
Yeah. And I'm still with the same teacher for those past 20 years. I've been very lucky to have one guide, one guru, if you will, through the whole process. But that's how my morning begins. And it's a priority, and it's a choice that I make, and it's a deliberate choice. This is where I will start taking control of my own temperament.
You set your intention through the tabla.
Absolutely. So I don't have bad days because my days start really beautifully. Okay. They start with me expressing my absolute love, devotion, and humility in front of an instrument that, yes, after 20 years of a journey, I've accomplished a lot on the instrument, but there's a long, long road ahead of me to go.
Right.
And so to start the day with that reminder, I love what I'm doing. I am humbled by what I'm doing. And that gives me not only the spirit, the will to continue doing it, but also the reverence for why I'm doing it in the first place, which is speaking towards something that's larger than I am.
So there's also a deep sense of gratitude in your life that propels you as well.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that goes all the way back to my parents and my family and that upbringing. Even to have the opportunity to have music in my life from the age of 4 is when I started playing the drums. I was so small. Talk about being a tall guy. Okay? Well, there's a point when I was short.
Of course.
And as a 4-year-old, I literally my feet couldn't reach the foot pedals. Okay. So I taught myself how to play the drum set hands only. And my grandfather was a semi-professional drummer in Seattle. I grew up in the eastern portion of Washington State, a town called Wenatchee, a very small town, kind of farming community. I have 3 older brothers. All of them played the drums at some capacity, amongst other instruments.
Were your mom and dad musicians as well?
My mother was a dancer. My dad was a vocalist, and not really a trained vocalist, but he had a wonderful voice, wonderful voice, and he knew it. And he loved to express it.
And I know that you've trained. You have vocal training in Hindu, or in
a little bit with Hindustani vocal music. Yes,
but you also have traditional vocal training.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I didn't know about you is that you also have read audiobooks or at least one that I know of. What was your vocal training? When did you start that at a young age? Also,
no. That was, I did choir like a lot of kids did. By the time I got into high school, my senior year of high school, I knew I wanted to be a professional musician when I was in the 4th grade.
Wow.
It was still in elementary school.
I suppose I did too. I just wasn't that aware of it.
Yeah.
But yes.
I was hyper aware of it.
Yeah.
I knew exactly what I wanted. And so I started working towards that goal really early and taking on as many opportunities and challenges as I could. My last year in high school.
Encouraged by your parents.
Yeah. Very much so. My last year in high school, I had 8 periods per day. 5 of them were music classes or independent study where I could go and practice, and other classes where the teachers had enough trust in me to get the homework and whatnot done.
Right.
They'd let me go and go practice. And that was huge.
So you've always been self-motivated and focused.
So. Now that particular facet, that's a practice.
Yes.
Okay.
It is.
And it evolves over time. And a number of times, the practice gets, derailed sometimes because life kind of takes over. I can say very confidently that thankfully it never disrupted me enough to where I lost my personal practice on my instruments, and I never lost the love and desire to play music. But the outlet of how I could earn a living doing this, I went through the same ringer that, you and countless other of our colleagues and friends that we know. They've all gone through the same hardships. So,
well, that leads me to a quote of yours that I read that says, "I have eliminated the need to choose between making art and making a living. Each act informs and guides one another. As such, I'm a living, breathing artist, and nothing pulls me from that focus."
Yeah.
This is a beautiful quote, and I was really happy to read that and wanted to share that with the listeners.
Yeah.
I think it's important. I guess this is a 2-part question, but how do you divide up your day? You, like myself, are a multi-instrumentalist,
right?
Not just limited to percussion and drums, but you play guitars and you sing, and there's a lot of things that you do.
Of course.
How do you stay on top of your discipline and your focus and your practice? And I guess we'll leave that. We'll just let that be the question for now.
So the first thing I do is the easiest, which is I keep a practice log. I literally have a little notebook that I keep in my studio. And every time I sit down to practice, I put a timer on. And if I'm going to practice I use the 15-minute rule. If I have 15 minutes in between tasks, like let's say I just finished lunch, I just finished folding laundry, which are still chores I got to do too, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to leave and go to rehearsal.
Not only are those chores you need to do, at some point they all become one and the same.
Yes, they do. And that's the point that I hope I can express through our conversation today, is that this is all encompassing. This is what it means to be a holistic artist. So when I'm folding the laundry, that is musical practice to me. Okay.
It is.
But so let's say I finish with those tasks and I have 15 minutes before, the car is packed, I'm ready to go, but I've got 15 minutes. Well, I can sit down at the practice pad and I can play for 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. And so I will write down in my practice log 15 minutes of practice pad. And now generally I like my practice sessions to go, between 1 to 3 hours, right? Mm-hmm. And so my goal for daily practice is between 3 and 5 hours a day. That's not rehearsals, that's not sessions, that's not performance. That's my personal practice. Okay.
It's also not being involved in your marriage and
exactly.
paying your bills. And,
I have one big fan who's my wife, and she has accepted this part. And one of the reasons, and this is another thing to communicate as part of being a holistic artist, is that it not only takes sacrifice, but I think people are confident enough with making sacrifice that they can choose to do so. But sometimes what it means is defending a position and not allowing yourself to be swayed from that. And that is the negotiation of a marriage. And so when I met my wife, we've been together now for 9 years, almost 9 years, I should say. And we've been married now almost 2 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. But one of the very first things that she learned about me within the first few months of being a couple was that I make a set of choices that take priority over everything else. And nothing that you do or say will change that. Okay. And I'm letting you know that so that you can then make an informed choice. Am I the kind of person you want to be with? And I'm really lucky that that's the person she fell in love with, was someone who did make those choices and say, I'm not going to allow that thin feeling in my bank account or in my wallet. I'm not going to allow that to cause panic and make me stop doing what I'm doing and suddenly change and run off and say, I got to earn $200 or I'm going to die.
Right.
Right. That doesn't happen. Okay. Now, there were times in the past when that did happen. And so here I am stuck between a choice. I can either improve my artistic practices and stay dedicated to that, or I can go get a gig and try to figure out how to make some money or something like that. Well, Starbucks wouldn't hire me, dude. I applied at Starbucks and they rejected me. Mm-hmm. Amoeba Records rejected me. They wouldn't hire me.
I applied at Trader Joe's. They wouldn't take me.
Yeah, exactly.
I wanted to pick up some extra work to pay for radio promotion for one of my singles.
Nothing doing, because they take one look at you and your resume, and they also see, and this is something I know very well about you, Terry, when you speak, the love and the passion of music, like it is a glow, right? Because of how well defined that is for you and yourself. That is the pillar around which everything else is oriented. And that's what I'm getting at. When you choose that, it's almost as if everyone around picks up on that vibe, and it's like, oh, that's a musician, and that's a serious person, and I can sort of trust that. And people like that feeling of security when they're around someone who there's no misconceptions about who this person is.
Right, but they don't want to hire you to make their coffee.
No, they don't. Right.
Which I guess it's sort of a blessing.
Yeah.
It brings us back to our purpose.
So when you mentioned comic books,
although by the way, I admire that you are open and willing to go do something outside of your love and passion, that there's a practical side to you, because I think it's important to be open.
Oh yeah, you have to be open
and not feel that you're beneath a certain experience.
Nothing like that. No.
So you're talking about your comic book.
Well, yeah, I mentioned this because there's a shop in Hollywood called Golden Apple Comics, and is my
as a big smile comes across your face.
I love the store because the owners are good friends of mine, and I've shopped there now for 15, 16 years or something like that. I've been a patron of their store for such a long time. I have a pull box at Golden Apple, so I have, these are the books that I want for sure every month. They pull them off the rack and they put them in my box.
Great.
So it's like a subscription service. So I've got a pull box at Golden Apple. And I remember at a certain point, this is in like 2003, 2004 or something like that, I approached the owner and I was like, hey, I want you to give me a job because I needed some extra work.
Sure.
But my mind was such that I'm not going to take a job making coffee for anybody because I don't learn anything from that. Maybe I'll learn something about coffee or, I'm over the Hollywoodism that's like, yeah, go and make coffee for someone because you never know, a producer might walk in and like, no, that's nonsense and you should know better than that. Okay. You'll meet those producers anywhere and everywhere when your mind and your spirit are in the right place. You'll find those people because they will be open to you when you're open to them. Okay. But I approached the owner, Ryan Leibowitz at Golden Apple, and I said, I want you to give me a job. And here's what I'm working on. And this is how I see, what my time at Golden Apple would be like. I'm a comic book guy. I love comics ever since I was a little kid. And now I have this project. And so, I think this would be really great. And he's like, you know what? You're a great guy. And I think that all your project stuff is awesome, but I can't hire you, because you'll be gone in 3 months because you'll be here. And because you're upward trending. And right. I can tell when I talk to you. Yeah. And man, this was a valuable lesson. Okay. Because he observed something in me that I was reticent to observe in myself, which is I have a vision and a drive that will take me forward and hopefully it will take me up. Okay. The forward momentum I can do just out of my natural being. Like that's the part that comes natural to me is to keep going. Keep practicing, keep thinking, keep writing, right? Keep talking, keep having conversations. Go out and play gigs, go out and take rehearsals. Or I set up jam sessions with musicians all the time. I'll just, call one of my friends on the phone and say, come and play. Come and hang out and let's play. And he saw that in me and said, that's not the kind of employee that I need, but I respect you. Okay. And since then, did that change my relationship with this gentleman? Yes, it did. In the sense that he recognized something in myself that I needed to recognize and take ownership of. I needed to own that. It is part of my responsibility to embrace all of my gifts and all of these drives which we're describing and the work that I've done to put these things into alignment. I now have the responsibility to defend those values. Okay. And because if I don't, they will get abused and they will get dropped by the wayside. And that's when people compromise. And I was unwilling to compromise. And so, when I met my wife and she learned that about me too, that was a system shock for her because she had never encountered an individual who would be so resolute and say, by the way, on these points right here, there is zero compromise from me. And beyond that, I have a lot of flexibility in the ability to compromise. But these things, I don't. So if you can accept those things, then we have a great place to start a broader set of negotiations of how to be a couple and how to grow together. Right. And we have in really, really wonderful ways. But there's these other things that she knows are just, part of that stone, or I should say the steel that is
better choice. Yeah.
That is the person that I am. And and steel is the right choice because I love this quote. Steel is strong because it knew the hammer and white heat. Yeah. Steel is crafted by going through the fire. What did Charles Bukowski say? What matters most is how well you walk through the fire.
Yes.
Right? And you can do that. You can walk through the fire. You can be a fire walker. And at the end of that, everything that you've experienced in that will truly be yours. And you'll be made of steel at that point, or at least that little part of you will be galvanized and so strong as of that. And whenever I work with individuals, I teach a lot of music, although at this particular point in my life, I'm teaching less than I have in the past. In the past, I've relied a little bit more on...
Right, I know teaching has been a very large part of your life. Yeah. Not just your career. No. I'm smiling right now. Yeah. Because you're saying steel is what you are made of.
Sure.
And I had a hip replacement less than a year ago.
Wow. Yeah.
And there's steel in my body now. Yeah. That's part of what they use for the prosthetic. And now I'm excited.
Yeah.
That I literally, not just figuratively and conceptually, but I am made of steel. And you just empowered me in another way with that visual.
There's so much to take from that experience too. I remember we shared this particular point. You told me about that hip surgery and I had a torn meniscus in my left knee that I had to have repaired. And I think we were kind of commiserating about that a little bit, just that experience, but I'm glad whenever I hear people talk about those experiences as being good things.
Yes, absolutely.
As being positive, because therein is your inspiration of how to navigate these other hardships about being an artist, right? How do you make a living in a landscape that continues to change and shift and vanish under your feet? I think you came to Los Angeles for very similar reasons that I did, which is this was the place to be. It was the highest talent pool.
Right.
There was the most talented musicians lived in Los Angeles. There was also a huge industry that was built around those very talented people. It was a creative industry, whether it be expressed in the recorded medium through film, television, or album sales, right? Or in live performance where, man, you couldn't walk up and down Sunset Strip without bumping into another club.
Right.
And it was one club after another, right? And you could, on any given night at its heyday, just take an evening and walk from club to club and see one famous band after another.
Right, to be within spitting distance of excellence.
Yeah.
Constantly. We are rapidly running out of time.
Oh, sure.
We have about 6 minutes left of our conversation. I want to do something. Can you set up with the cajon really quickly? I have 3 closing questions, but I wanted to just take a quick, just 60 seconds to give an oral example of an instrument or these drumsticks that they're brushes that you invented, and they're actually being released from a company in Germany. Tell everybody very quickly what they're called. They're cajon brushes. And then I want you just to show them just like 30, 40 seconds before we get to our final questions.
So this is the Schlagwerk percussion. They call it BRC06, the brush cajon shaker brush.
Yes.
Is what it is. Okay, so I just call them shaker brushes. It's pretty cool. My name is on the stick and everything. So it's like the TJ Troy Signature Series stick. But basically, it is a nylon snare drum brush, but with a basket shaker mounted onto the end to it. So this evolved very holistically, right, out of my own personal practice. And I was practicing with brushes on the cajon, and I wanted additional sound. And I thought, what if I could put a shaker on the end of the brush? So I started messing with brushes that I had, came up with a couple of working prototypes, and then shared it with Schlagwerk. I endorse Schlagwerk percussion. It's my cajon of choice that I work with. And they were really keen on the idea. So we released it at the NAMM show this year. It's now for sale in Europe. It's coming to the U.S. any day now. It should be in guitar centers in Sam Ash and Sweetwater and everywhere. So
exciting. So play a little bit more of it so everybody can hear.
Yeah. So just the shaker implement itself, you can hear. Nice, very crisp upper level transient frequency, right? So it works really nice in recorded music, very nice with acoustic settings, but because it's up in this frequency arc that very few other instruments are going to operate at, so you've got space. Now on the cajon,
It's fantastic.
It's almost like an additional ride cymbal,
So let me cut you. Thank you for doing that, by the way.
Absolutely.
There's some great video. There's going to be a link up on the artist page that Intertalk Media is building for you so that they can go see some videos of you playing that. We literally have 4 minutes left. So we've got 4 questions in that amount of time. The first is a 2-part question. Since the show is called Making It, what does making it mean to you both personally and professionally?
So making it means $1 above zero. Okay, so from a very practical standpoint, if I am covering all my bases through the work on music that I do, then I consider that to be a success, 100%, and would never look and say, boy, I wish it could be something different. I'm always striving for, more opportunities just because I'm hungry to play and to share. So making it on a personal level, I've already made it. I've already done what I said that I was going to do, which is a life lived through music, and a life that isn't that does not require compromise in order to make it through to the end of the day. There's some challenges to get to that place, certainly, but at this stage of my life, I'm very proud to be able to say that's what I set out to do, and I can honestly say I've made it in that regard. But from a professional standpoint, nuts and bolts, $1 above zero, I'm good with that. Mm-hmm. Anything else above that is just the icing on the cake, and not necessarily the reason why I do what I do, but certainly helps.
Can you share 3 tips for success that have driven your career?
The practice log, which I described earlier, is huge because that's one way with how you hold yourself accountable. Okay. That goes into the second point, which is whenever you're in doubt, practice. Get with your instrument and recenter your mind and your spirit. Why do you play music to begin with? It's because you love playing. You play the guitar for a reason, and you don't play the bass the way that you play the guitar, right? You don't play the drums. There's a reason you play the guitar. So when in doubt and you feel the pressure coming in around you, chewing at you, trying to pull your attention away, go to your instrument and play for at least 15 minutes, and you will find your temperament changed. The second thing along with that, which is probably about as important, is just making sure that you're eating and sleeping correctly. Stay hydrated, drink water, eat good food. Okay. I myself am omnivorous. I'm not restrictive in any of my dietary choices. And that works best for me. The big one for me, which I've discovered, is sleep. I have come to accept this part of myself, that if I'm not getting enough sleep, I am nowhere near the person that I can be if I'm adequately rested. So I make it a point in principle to stay rested. So,
great.
Yeah.
Final question in our last 60 seconds. At this point of your life, with everything that you know to be true, TJ, what would you tell your younger self?
Relax. It'll be all right. I wish that I could almost sometimes go back and just say those words to myself and say, it's going to be okay. Stay the course and trust in that. So much is left out of our control. Just guide me and relax that I'm on the path, so.
That's fantastic. Just so and all of our listeners, I'm starting my practice logbook today, because that's not something I have been doing, and that's about to change. So I appreciate that tip.
Rock on, man. Rock on.
And I also appreciate the idea that even if it's 15 minutes,
yep,
that it's incredibly invaluable to use that time to stay focused, grounded, and to continue to practice the craft that we both love. TJ Troy, thank you so much. I'm really excited to hear the new Parch album when it comes out. It'll be on iTunes and all the other places that you can hear music. Mm-hmm. And I really wish you the best. Thank you for spending the hour with me.
Terry, thanks so much for having me, man. What a pleasure to talk with you.
And everybody, thank you for spending the time with us this week, and we'll see y'all next week. Take care, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Woolman.